Well, good afternoon, everyone. Today is Monday, March 10th, 2025. We're here this afternoon for a work session with Community Planning, Infrastructure, and Resources. I'm Kristen Stevens, Chair of the Board of County Commissioners. With me are my fellow commissioners, Commissioner Jody Shattuck McNally and Commissioner John Kafalis. We also have our County Manager, Lorinda Volker, with us. We have Frank Haug from our Attorney's Office at the table, and we have Leslie Ellis, our Community Planning, Infrastructure, and Resources Director. We have 3 items on today's agenda, and Leslie, I'll turn it over to you, and you can introduce our guest.
Okay, thank you. Leslie Ellis. And we actually have 2 items, because we'll table the second item because Jenny is out sick today, and so there was an urgency to try to work our way through that without her, so we'll find a date when she's back and we can resume that. So you have the reading materials and can be well prepared for when we bring that back. So that brings us to just the first item, the oil and gas updates, and we have Matt Sura here joining us today, our special counsel for oil and gas, and Frank also to help with that item, and Matt's going to bring you up to date on some of the work that he's been doing on our behalf. So thank you, Matt.
That's great. Nice to see you all. Great to be here. Happy Monday. So there's a lot to update you on. In the last 6 months, there's been 2 rulemakings that the Larimer County has been involved in. The first one is a Reg 7 rulemaking at the Air Quality Control Commission. Reg 7 is where they keep all the oil and gas regulations, air quality regulations, at the Air Quality Control Commission. And this one was prompted by the EPA Quad O regulations that require now all states to require all pneumatic valves throughout the oil and gas sector to be non-leaking. And pneumatic valves are a controller on an oil and gas, particularly a gas system that uses the natural gas and the pressure from the natural gas to open and close valves to run the oil and gas machinery. And every time that pneumatic valve actuates, it actually releases some methane. And therefore, these pneumatic valves have been very leaky and one of the biggest sources of methane in the oil and gas sector nationwide. Colorado has been in front of this problem, and since 2014 has been requiring them to stop using the full actuating, and you know, they've got them to the point where they actuate less, or they actually emit less methane. But with this new regulation, all the remaining pneumatic valves have to be retrofitted to be non-leaking entirely. So that means putting air compressors on site, or having those pneumatic valves, the methane going to basically back into the cycle, back into the pipeline, as it were. So that's good news. The other part of that rulemaking was for a long time, for the last 3 years, we've had these regulations that require pre-production and early post-production monitoring, early oil and gas monitoring for the drilling and fracking phases. And the regulations really weren't that structured, because the monitoring of oil and gas and air quality is happening so fast. It's moving forward so quickly that they didn't know what types of monitors they wanted to require, or what type of emissions they wanted to even monitor. And so they've gotten a lot of information over the last 3 years and are using that to now require very specific types of monitoring. And if there is something in the air that requires even more in-depth monitoring, it needs to basically go to an open air canister monitoring that is going to capture some of that air and determine whether or not there's BTEX there. Benzene, toluene, ethylene, and xylene. These are cancer-causing, carcinogenic chemicals that we don't want in the air, and we don't want anybody to breathe. And so it's good news in that we're going to have less methane and better controls for monitoring during that pre-production and early production. And we were involved in that rulemaking as part of a coalition with a number of local governments that they called themselves, government coalition, the local government coalition. Also, we're involved in rulemaking at the Energy and Carbon Management Commission for recycling of produced water. And this produced water recycling is something that has been a problem for many years. We've known this, particularly on the Front Range, where we're doing a lot of hydraulic fracturing. Every one of those wells is using about 5 million gallons for hydraulic fracturing. And typically, on the Front Range, they don't do anything with that water except dispose of it in injection wells, particularly in Weld County. And the legislature 2 years ago passed legislation that required that we do more to recycle produced water, particularly on the Front Range, while in increasing produced water recycling each year, but not allowing for any increased air pollution. And this is difficult because recycling is an activity that inherently could create more air pollution. And so it was a difficult rulemaking. And ultimately, what ended up happening is that Larimer County, with Adams County, Weld County, Chevron, and some conservation organizations got together and came up with a consensus proposal. And that consensus proposal allowed for a little bit more flexibility, allowing really the creativity of the oil and gas industry to find out the best ways to do this and on appropriate locations. So the staff proposal required every location to recycle 4%, and then it was going to go up to 10% and then 20% in preceding years in four-year increments. And it was going to really constrain the industry because they were going to be required to recycle the same amount in a location that's in the middle of a neighborhood as they are in the middle of Arapahoe County, where it's a lot easier to recycle because they have pipeline infrastructure and they have the ability to put tanks on site. We don't want recycling to increase air pollution or trucking, frankly, water trucks. We don't want water trucks in and out of neighborhoods. And so we designed a proposal that will allow for water credit trading, recycling water credit trading, essentially. And it's an innovative proposal. It's never been tried. And it, again, puts Colorado really in the leadership position in water recycling requirements for the oil and gas industry. One of the issues that we weren't able to completely address is how to measure the amount of additional air pollution that comes from these water recycling projects and what constraints we might have for recycling generally on the Front Range because we're in an ozone non-attainment area. We've been working, I've been involved in rulemaking since 2014, trying to do everything we can to limit the amount of volatile organic compounds from tanks, specifically oil tanks, but also produced water tanks can have inherent in that produced water some methane and some oil, and that they also emit every time that there's new water that goes in there, that it displaces some of that air, and that air has to be released, and that carries with it some volatile organic compounds. And so we know that tanks are a problem. We've been trying to eliminate tanks, and now because of this legislation, they're asking us to have more tanks on site. So there's going to be a balance there. We certainly want to recycle, but we're in a crisis with our air quality on the Front Range, and so there's a trade-off there. And we have to really look carefully on that. So there's a stakeholder process that's going to occur for the next 9 months, and it's going to conclude with a rulemaking at the beginning of 2026 with new ECMC regulations around air quality and recycling. And that is something that I've approached Leah on, Leah Schneider. I'm hoping that she can be part of that stakeholder process. It's going to be really important, and Front Range leaders in air quality need to be involved because, certainly the industry is going to be well represented. It's important to have local governments there as well. And so, in looking at upcoming regulations, no problem. One of the issues is, and we've been talking about this for a while, is advanced leak detection at the Public Utilities Commission. Public Utilities Commission has under its jurisdiction almost all pipelines, including those from midstream oil and gas, but also all the pipelines for utilities. And PUC, Pipeline Safety Commission, it's a program within the PUC, they only have 7 inspectors. And some of those inspectors are reading inspection reports and doing the important work in-house, and then the other, maybe 3 or 4, are out in the field inspecting all the pipelines, the tens of thousands of pipeline miles in the state of Colorado. They can't possibly do it all. And so we as a state have always relied and will need to continue to rely on the industry to do that monitoring for us. The problem is that in Colorado, they're using some outdated methods to monitor pipeline, for pipeline leaks. The old method is to walk the pipeline and look for dead grass, because that would indicate that there's a leak there and that there may be a methane leak underneath. They certainly have some sensors, but even the biggest operator or the biggest utility in the state of Colorado said their goal is to monitor every one of their pipelines once every 3 years. So that means that there could be a pipeline leaking for 1,000 days before it's discovered. And that's their goal. That's not necessarily met. So advanced leak detection is incredible. Again, the technologies are advancing so quickly in monitoring and finding leaks. We know this because METEC is one of those places where they're learning about new technologies and developing new technologies at Colorado State. The METEC Center is designed to find and advance technologies to find oil and gas leaks. So, these include flying overhead with aircraft, with sensors. They've got mobile ground labs, continuous monitoring, satellite imagery, and smart pigs. These are just some of the types of advanced leak detection technologies that are out there. And, some of our designed to find really, really small leaks, and some of them are designed to find super emitters. The satellite imagery can find these leaks that are known to occur, and when they do occur, scientists believe that they're responsible for about 10 to 12% of the methane releases nationwide. So it's an important problem to start solving. We have the ability to do this. The PUC has been directed to do this since 2021 and hasn't. They're finally getting to that rulemaking this year. And the stakeholder process is going to start this month. And they're expecting to finish that rulemaking by November of this year. So that's one of the biggest issues that's coming up. And the other issues are, as I said, the stakeholder process with the ECMC and looking at air quality around water recycling. The Air Quality Control Commission is doing a toxics rulemaking. They've decided that there's 5 toxics that they want to look at in terms of regulating at the state level, not just the national level or the EPA. And benzene is one of the toxics that they've chosen. And benzene, of course, is one of the top constituents that are released from the oil and gas industry. And so they're looking at setting health-based standards for benzene this next year. We're also going to be doing a new rulemaking for a statewide implementation plan, and some of that is going to be impacting oil and gas, specifically natural gas processing plants. And they're also looking at a final rulemaking to look at other oil and gas emissions that were kind of left behind in this last rulemaking that they didn't get a chance to address. So that's kind of what we've been doing and kind of where I see things going in the near future.
Thank you, Matt. Any questions for Matt? Commissioner Shattuck McNally.
Thank you, Matt. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you.
You gave us a lot of great information. I didn't know if you have some notes you could just pass on to us from all that information you shared that you could maybe give to Leslie, just a kind of synopsis of all that you shared.
I'd be happy to do that.
That would be great. My first question is, And again, thanks for all this really useful information and representing us in these proceedings and giving us this information. You know, there was compromise for some bills to not have bills coming this year and next year and all that. And I understand we don't need to go into that, but I just wanted to understand this rulemaking and like the benzene and some of this that's going forward. It sounds like it's happening now. Is that impacted at all by that agreement? Or is a lot of that work still going forward and progressing as a pace that is acceptable for everyone involved?
That's a really great question. So the grand bargain really was only meant to influence what can happen in legislation. And so these rulemaking processes, some are dictated by the federal government, and particularly with Reg 7 changes to bring us back into attainment for ozone standards, those have to happen and have to happen on a regular basis. And so that rulemaking is going to occur whether there's any agreement or not. And these other rulemakings were already required by law, particularly the PUC. As I mentioned, that was required by a statute that was passed in 2021. And unfortunately, the statute didn't have a time frame as to when that rulemaking should occur. And so PUC has been putting it off for now 4 years, and finally they're getting to that rulemaking now.
Thank you. And my second question, if I might, Madam Chair, about the water, recycled water. And I know that's a concern for a lot of folks. And I'm wondering about these injection wells when they put the recycling water back in and injecting. What is can you help me remind myself, what is the monitoring of if that leaks out of that injection well or if it gets into, what kind of process or accountability is there if that starts to get into groundwater and things, and what kind of testing or what's in place, or is there anything in place?
Absolutely. So the only way you can inject water is through a permitted Class 2 injection well, and that's a federal policy that we're also implementing at the state that only allows you to inject into formations that are known to contain brine water or water that's non-potable, never could be. And it's well below any sources of groundwater and well below, frankly, any oil and gas formations too, because the oil and gas industry doesn't want that injected into where they're looking for oil and gas. So it's well below all those levels, and there hasn't been any concerns in terms of leaking from those formations. The one concern that we had about 10 years ago was we had a little bit of seismic activity because of one operator that was over-injecting into a formation that had a fault in it, and that resulted in a slight seismic activity. But it's been pretty well regulated. The problem is that water is gone from the hydrologic cycle forever. And one of the creative solutions that they're looking at in the Produced Water Consortium, which is 31 people, a bunch of stakeholders that have been working for the last year to work on these regulations and are going to continue working on this problem, is can they use those injection sites as a source of produced water that they can use and recycle? Because that would take away all of the air quality concerns. All the storage issues that I mentioned, having them in tanks, would go away. And they're happen to be conveniently located everywhere there's oil and gas, particularly in Weld County. So, but that is something that they're having to work out. And really, they know they can put water down them. They don't know that they can bring it back up very easily.
I appreciate your answers. Thank you very much. That's all I have for right now. Thank you.
Commissioner Cafalas.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you, Matt. And appreciate all the work you've done over the years, cooperating with our team and Matt Lafferty. So thank you for all that. One question that comes to mind is, in light of significant shifting at the federal level and many uncertainties that are posed by that shifting, is there any reason to be concerned that some of these standards for air quality and things of that nature, detecting leaks and all the rest, might change?
That's a great question, and one that certainly we're worried about in a lot of states, not Colorado, and primarily because we've got primacy over many of those issues that we've been discussing. EPA has authority over injection wells, as an example, but we've taken that over. They also have air quality monitoring requirements, at the state level and in compliance with ozone, but the state has taken over those issues as well. And so we have control over those issues here in Colorado, and I think have an opportunity to be a beacon of, still working on these issues in a time when there's going to be significant rollbacks in some other states. We can still be making gains on trying to reduce ozone, trying to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases and specifically methane that is released in Colorado.
May I do a follow-up, please?
You may.
Thanks. Thank you. As a follow-up question, Matsura, for example, the EPA national ambient air quality standards that set parts per million for ozone, what's to say the EPA doesn't change that, which could affect, I suppose, how stringent, whether all of a sudden maybe we're not in a non-attainment area because now you're allowed to have 100 parts per billion or whatever the metric is. You follow my question, sir?
Yeah, and
Yeah,
and not to speculate too much, but
of course.
a rulemaking like that would be incredibly difficult. It would require rulemaking, and that would be probably multiple years.
Oh, at the federal level.
At the federal level. And then that would also allow for set-off rulemaking then at the state level. But you're looking at 4 or 5 years, probably at the least, to have all that unravel. Certainly in this administration, they can start that process, but they would need another administration to continue it. One of the things that your question triggered is that these PUC regulations, one of the reasons that the PUC said that they were going to wait on advanced leak detection is because PHMSA, under the Department of Transportation, was developing their own regulations, and they wanted to make sure that they were in compliance with the federal regulations before they implemented the state regulations. Well, the Biden administration put forward those regulations a day late into the Federal Registry. It was the day before Trump was inaugurated, and so they never did get put into the Federal Registry, and they'll never take effect now. But at the state level, Director White, Rebecca White at the PUC, wants to implement these regulations that have been fully vetted and stakeholder for the last 4 years, and implement them in Colorado for advanced leak detection. And so we're going to be one of the first states to do so. And I think, again, an opportunity for, while the rest of the country is seeing some rollbacks, we can still be showing some progress and forward progress on these issues that are so important.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt. One question that, so this is all really, great news that, we're moving forward. And thank you for helping us understand sort of the complexity around the recycled water, for the produced water. It seems like there has to be a balance, right? And so not the easiest thing to achieve there, but I appreciate you working on that. Certainly excited about advanced leak detection. It's amazing. technology really can help us do this work better. I mean, nobody needs to walk the line, right? This isn't the 1800s, and so let's use technology to make things better. Do you anticipate any, would you suggest any changes to our local land use code and regulations around oil and gas because of any of the new rulemaking, especially like new toxins? I remember, and it's been a few years since we did, tighten up our regulations around oil and gas, but benzene was mentioned and not really thoroughly talked about, right? And now if it joins this sort of toxics rulemaking, would you imagine that we would need to relook at that? I mean, and it may just be valuable to relook at them, regulations that you put in place every so often anyway.
I think that's right. There very well could be some regulations or some movement in that toxics realm that the local government would want to help assist in regulating and monitoring for those locations that we know have benzene. And that's not just the oil and gas sector. That can be asphalt plant. It can be some gas stations have benzene, frankly. So that could very well be something that we look at, depending on what happens in that state regulation and how those regulations could be implemented at the local and state level. Yeah.
And then, so I serve on the Regional Air Quality Commission, and we're looking at, we obviously have to do a SIP, a state implementation plan, and we're really looking at control strategies that we can add to the SIP. And you probably know about the blowdown and venting kind of, and it's interesting because it seems like there is some differences of opinion between the air quality folks at CDPHE and maybe and the RAC, and you may have followed some of those conversations.
More and more.
Huh?
Yeah, more and more disagreements.
Yeah, and so do you anticipate, if that moves forward, is that something that you, because to be honest, you have to include something in this SIP that's going to lower these numbers. And you've probably already have all the low-hanging fruit in that case, right? And so I think that you have to start looking at whether it's a transportation sector or oil and gas, really kind of, going in with a fine-tooth comb on some of these issues. So
That's right.
do you anticipate that to be coming up in the work that you're doing in the future, or do you feel like you haven't heard a lot about the venting and blowdown strategies?
Well, my understanding is that is one of the issues that's to be considered at this next SIP. And so I'm hopeful that will be put forward by the RAC and approved by the staff. It needs really to go through the staff to be formally put into the agreement. Although the RAC is the one that does it, they have to have staff support, unfortunately.
Right, so it still remains to be seen whether that will happen and will make its way towards the SIP, but it's something you have on your radar for sure.
I'm hopeful that it does because it's really important.
Yeah, it seems like it is. Thank you. All right, any other questions before we let Matt go? Well, thank you, Matt. It was a really great update, and I appreciate that. And
It was my pleasure.
I took a lot of notes, so really happy.
I'll get something written up in the next week or so that'll just kind of give won't be too long, but it'll be bulleted points of what has happened in the past and what we might see happening in the future.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks.
you. All right.
Thank you.
So we only have one more item,
Yes,
the
and
CPIR update.
back to me. So the nature of my update is really around your land use hearing this afternoon, and then we'll give you back some time because you just got some more reading materials for that also. So up on the dais, you got some papers that relate to the PRPA hearing, which is the discussion item hearing, and one memo relating to one of the consent item, just for, as part of the record. And then we also wanted to let you know, Jenny will not be here, so we've got the hearing covered in different ways. Cassidy will do the introduction part that Jenny would typically do, and then we have our CERT administrative staff who will help with the public hearing part. So we should have everything covered. Frank and Christine will be there from our legal team to help with anything that's needed there. And right now, we currently have about 28 people signed up, which is roughly equivalent to what we saw at the Planning Commission hearing. This is for public comment and testimony. And so with that, I think we would ask for direction on whether you want to grant 3 minutes or 2 minutes for the public comments. I think it took a little less than an hour last time with that many people. We also have dinner that's ordered and should arrive around 5-ish that you could, either take a break, or if things go speedily, you might be done and ready to eat when you wrap up the hearing, but that will be available too if there's a natural break in the hearing. There's 4 items that are on consent, and unless you're thinking that you have questions or want to pull something off of consent, we're not really anticipating that. We haven't heard anything from the public suggesting, or the applicant suggesting, that they would want to pull anything. I think that's it as far as updates. So probably the main question would be the public hearing testimony times, and then any other questions that you have.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Shedek-Manili, do you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. One of the other items on consent, I had a question about a mitigation or lack of mitigation. I hate to pull the whole thing. Do I need to pull it all the way off just to ask a question?
It probably depends on the nature of the question. I'll turn to Frank because there's sort
Yeah.
of some gray area there.
It does depend on the nature of the question. I mean, if it's going to involve the need for deliberation amongst the board about whether it should be sort of discussed more fully, then you'd have to pull it. If it's something that's like a technical question that the staff can answer, we can probably just do it that way. But if it goes to the merits of whether you think you either would or wouldn't vote for it, depending on something, then that, I think, is probably going to need to be pulled.
I'm not sure if that would, but also I think I needed to have it clarified.
Well, maybe I can help
Okay.
with that.
I'm trying to be careful.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
But I'm trying to say, I just probably need a little clarification, and then that clarification might make me ask another question. But I'm not sure if I need the whole thing, so,
Well, maybe I can discuss, I can get some clarification from you on that.
thank you.
Anything else? Not today. I'm inclined for 3 minutes, just because there seems to be a lot of interest in this issue, and I think that gives for a more full vetting of some of the questions that the public has, so, Commissioner.
Yeah, thank you. I would agree. Thank you. Just a bit of a heads up. I'm thinking that one question I would have of staff, of Cassidy, is to maybe explain the process a little bit. I know it's in the staff report. Just, in other words, what I'm getting at is, in our staff report, it talks about a pre-application meeting in April, and then I think it was in April, then ultimately submitting the application in, I think it was October, 60 days. I wanted to get at what actually happens in those 60 days to determine that this thing is complete, even though there's a section to that. So I was thinking of asking Cassidy, mostly for the public record, and also for people to understand, we're given 926 pages to try to go through, not to read every page, because a lot of it's technical, in the matter of less than a week, and we don't get to shut off everything else. So I just want to assure the public that subject matter experts and others are looking at this stuff a lot more closely than I am, even though I did my best to read 500 pages pertaining to the Platte River reason. And the other thought I had for the county attorney folks, not to let you off the hook too much, and that is maybe say, I would ask you about the the process, the issue of the applicant has the burden of proof to, because oftentimes we're criticized, why do they get so much time, even though it's in our planning, procedures and all that, even though the chair, Kristen, responded to one of the, the questions about that, but maybe to explain a little bit about that,
That's fine, I can address
I
that.
figured, or, that's all.
Okay. And there will be a county, a staff sort of presentation before the applicant, so it'll be
Yeah,
pretty much
yeah.
run like normal.
Absolutely. The typical process of staff presentation, and then any clarifying questions that you may have, and then public comments and testimony, and then back to you. I'm sorry, staff presentation, applicant presentation, then clarifying comments. That's how we do it, right? I'm a little rusty. And then the public testimony, and then back to you for further deliberation and comments.
Okay, Commissioner.
So Madam Chair, I support your idea to do 3 minutes of comments, but I'm curious, staff, how much did we give them for rebuttal? Did we negotiate that, or is that just a standard 10 minutes?
I'll say that I made the decision, I was asked to make the decision as the chair of whether we would allow them 5 extra minutes for their presentation, and I said that was fine. I mean, in a big presentation like that, I don't think that's an uncommon request, so they will have 15 minutes. They actually said that they did not need rebuttal time, and so that their 5 minutes was, tacked on to their beginning of their program. My guess is that, we could still ask them questions to, if we, want rebuttal time, but it sounds like Frank might have a question about that.
Well, and I mean, this goes to what Commissioner Kafalas was just talking about, is the sort of order of the hearing, because it's a quasi judicial hearing, we have to conduct it like a court hearing, essentially, right? That's why it's called quasi judicial. And so whether they want to take advantage of a rebuttal time or not, I guess is up to them. I do think we need to at least offer them the opportunity to
Okay, all right.
because from a procedural standpoint, I
Thank
think if
you.
we don't do that,
Okay,
it creates a potential problem down the road
okay.
from a legal perspective. So whether they
Okay.
want to use it or
No, that's
not,
good
they
to know.
don't have to, but I
I'm
think
glad to
we
know that, because when I believe Jenny asked me the question around giving them an additional 5 minutes, I would have given them additional 5 minutes with rebuttal. I mean, that made sense to me, but, because it's a complex issue, and right, I want people to have that understanding as we move forward into the
I just want to,
hearing.
I didn't mean, I'm sorry.
No,
I
no,
want to
go
make sure I'm
ahead,
understanding.
please.
You're talking about the applicant.
The applicant,
Yeah,
that's right.
Because, not that it's any big trick, but the answer is it's the applicant's burden of proof. So just like in a court, when there's a certain party that has to prove their case, that's the same thing in this hearing, right? It's the applicant's burden of proof, and that's why they get the opportunity to rebut, because they have the obligation to prove their case.
Thank you.
2 more things.
Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner.
Just another question that I'll ask of Cassidy or staff is, I see that we have 2 letters from the mayors of Fort Collins and Loveland. And so my question to Cassidy would be, in terms of referral agencies, did we not reach out to the cities of Longmont and Estes Park, for them to give us feedback through their environmental planner or something along those lines? So that's a question, whether or not and they just didn't respond, which I think is curious. And then my question, I guess, for Frank is, as always, we have the option, if we need to kind of collect our thoughts and take a couple of deep breaths, we could ask the chair to, recess for a period of time. Isn't that correct?
That is correct. I would be open to that, for sure.
I can walk up and down the stairs 10 times.
Yeah, I'll ask Cassidy to just make sure she covers that whole process as part of her presentation. I think she already does and did, but we'll just,
And once again, Cassidy doesn't need a reminder, but everybody else does. Make sure the volume is up. Make sure people talk into the mics. I really want to hear as many words of this presentation as possible. Cassidy does a great job, but with the greatest respect for you, Madam Community Planning Infrastructure and Resource Director, you got to talk into that mic. And I'm still working on the hearing thing, trying to figure it out, so please, please.
Okay. Anything else regarding, Leslie, did you have anything else beyond today's
No, that's
hearing?
it for me.
Okay.
Yeah,
Any
thank
other
you.
questions on the hearing before we go? Miranda, do you have anything you want to, no? Okay. All right. Wonderful. Well, it's 2:10, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.